this lesson, we'll be discussing the mean. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to find the mean of a set of data, and then find the absolute value of the difference between the mean and a data point. So remember, absolute value means the distance from 0, and then the distance is always positive. So if we just look at 0, the absolute value of 0 is 0. If we look for this distance between 0 and -3, it's still 3 steps. So the absolute value of -3 is 3. When we look at this distance from 0 to 5, that's 5 steps. So the absolute value of 5 is 5. So deviation from the mean. First we have to find the mean, and remember, to find the mean we add up the numbers and divide by how many there are. Then we find the distance from each term from the mean, and we use the absolute value. So if we're finding the distance from the mean, that means we're subtracting. So we subtract each number from the mean, and then remember, we're taking the absolute value. So even if it's a negative, our answer is negative, it's going to be positive. And then we find the mean of all of those numbers and divide by how many there are. So remember, in that we're using only the positive numbers because we're using absolute value. So some examples. The absolute value of 4 is 4. The absolute value of -2 is +2. The absolute value of -2 plus 3. Well, -2 plus 3 is 1. The absolute value of 1 is 1. The absolute value of -5 plus 1. Well, -5 plus 1 is -4, and the absolute value of -4 is 4. If we take the absolute value of -5 times -7, well, -5 times -7 is +35. The absolute value of +35 is 35. -2 times +6, that's -12. The absolute value of -12 is +12. -10 divided by -2 is +5. The absolute value of +5 is 5. And +21 divided by -7 would be -3. And the absolute value of -3 is +3. Find the mean, the distance from the mean, and then the mean of the distances. Goodness. All right, so here's our data points, 13, 17, 22, 12, and 21. So to find the mean, I add them up, divide by 5, and that gets me 17. And then the distance from the mean. So how far is 13 from 17? So we just subtract all those. So 13 minus 17 is 4. Remember, we're doing the absolute value. 17 minus 17 is 0. 22 minus 17 is 5. 12 minus 17, the absolute value is 5. And 21 minus 17 is 4. Then we take these 5 numbers and we find the mean of them. So we add up 4, 0, 5, 5, and 4, and divide it by 5, and it gets 3.6. So let's try a few. So 0 times -10 is 0. Absolute value of 0 is 0. 4 times 3 is 12, and the absolute value of 12 is 12. -8 times -10 is +80, and the absolute value of +80 is 80. -10 times 8 is -80, and the absolute value of -80 is +80. So how do you find the mean? You add up the numbers and divide by how many there are. A value that is much higher or lower than the rest is called an outlier.